So Chapter 11, Key Issue 2, talks about the site and situation factors for industry and why they're important. Chapter 11, Key Issue 2 is a little bit longer. Before we get started, I want to review real quick what site and situation mean. Remember, situation is the location of a material relative to something else. So when we're looking at labor for industry, or we're looking at industry in general, you'll be looking at your ability to transport materials to and from something. Are you near a market? Are you near a highway? Are you near a seaport? So remember, situation is relative, while site just describes the characteristics of a location. So is there work available? Is there capital available? Is there land? What unique characteristics will help make your industry thrive? We're going to go over the types of situation factors. We'll look at why some industries are located near markets, why they use types of transportation, and we'll look at steel production as a case study or a key example. We'll also look at the distribution of motor vehicle production and why it's complex, and then we'll look at the site factors as well. And when we look at site factors, we'll look at distribution of textile and apparel production. So why are situation and site factors important? So we need to find out, why do we care about site and situation in relation to industry? And we need to know, are we near the materials? So again, like we were talking about in key issue 1, are you near the raw materials? Are you near energy? Are you near transportation? Are you near a market? And are you near labor? So for situation, we'll be looking at proximity to input or proximity to market. Proximity to input is when we are located near the raw materials, located near where something is. So when we're looking at proximity to input, we're looking at something where the raw material cost would be greater than the transportation of the product cost. This is very much like we talked with agriculture too, like where do you want to build the most expensive, what kind of farming do you want to do on the most expensive farmland, right? So when do you want to locate your industry, your factory near the raw materials? It's when you are going to be reducing the size or the weight of your material. So like mining, usually with mining you have your industry located near the mines because you're reducing a big chunk of ore to small manageable smelted pieces of ore. Or are you going to locate yourself near the market? So when would you pay more for land? Because if you're close to the market, your factory is probably in suburban or urban land, which means the land rent would be more expensive. So when is it worth it to have these factories located on land that's more expensive? When the raw material cost is going to be less than the transportation cost to the consumer. So bulk gaining industry. When you're building something that gets bigger, you're going to want to put it closer to the market. We call that bulk gaining. So like if you're adding water to a drink that makes it heavier, you want those markets to be closer. If you're building like seats for a car, those are really big and hard to transport. Those are going to be located closer to the automobile industry. Building an entire car, the pieces come from all over the world. But we don't ship a lot of whole cars in from other countries because that would be ridiculously expensive. So if you see this example here of some large beer companies that that are like nationwide, and beer is a strange thing because it's very cost prohibitive. It's really cheap. It's easy to be made locally, and a lot of it's water, right? So beer and soft drinks and any kind of beverage, a lot of that weight is water. So it doesn't always make sense to ship it from all across the world. And so even though if you're touring certain areas of the world, you'll see like the headquarters for Anheuser-Busch or the headquarters for Miller or the headquarters for Coca-Cola in Georgia, you're going to see that they have these distribution centers all over the country, and that's where they're going to finish producing and then transporting their materials. So at least they're a little closer to their major markets. And if you in general look across the world, you see that these corporate centers, these distribution centers, are located pretty close to some heavy population zones. Proximity to market is what are you going to pay more for more expensive land to be closer to the market. If you are a single market manufacturer, which means you are highly specialized, you don't have many customers, you're going to want to locate yourself near those customers. So examples might be the people who make zippers. If you are a zipper making corporation, you're going to locate your factories near other textile and clothing factories. Because why would you make zippers and then pay to ship them all over the world? So if you're going to open a new zipper factory, it's going to be near a clothing factory. So like YKK, the world's largest manufacturer of zippers, has factories in 68 countries, and those factories are located near clothing manufacturers. The other part might be making parts for motor vehicles. So if you're making car seats, you're going to be located right near the car manufacturer. And there's one of the YKK zipper manufacturers. You also might be located near a market because you make a perishable product. And we talked about this with agriculture a little bit as well. And so if you make a perishable product, you must have locations that are close enough to the market so they don't spoil or become dated during transportation. And so we talked about milk, right? How dairy farmers are often located closer to larger population centers, so they might pay more for their land, but milk is perishable. So the same thing about the people who pick up the milk and bottle it from those dairies. You're going to have those milk distribution centers located near major population centers as well. Bakers, you could, I guess, bake like bread from across the country, but you're going to have, bakeries, large major chain bakeries located across the country near population centers for the same reason. Other things might involve printed newspapers. So even though the internet is changing print journalism, a newspaper, why do we have different newspapers for different cities? Because when the newspaper is printed really early in the morning, it's dated, it's important, you need to get it there soon. So if you were driving newspapers from Chicago to California, by the time they got to California, that news would already be over a day old, right? So the reason we have many different newspapers in different towns, so you've got, your New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune. These are all different newspapers in different population zones because it's dated, it goes bad, it's perishable. And here they are producing potato chips, and potato chips don't go bad right away. So it's not really the best example. But they talk about how potato chips are better when they are they're freshly made. But our potato chips aren't really eaten fresh so much today, so I don't think that's a really good example. So where else are we going to look for situation factors? How are we going to ship things? So you want to be located near a place to ship your product. So we're looking at how are you going to choose how you ship your products? You're going to use ships? Are you going to use trains? Are you going to use trucks? Are you going to use air? So trucks are great for short distances. They're easy to load. They're easy to unload. And we do a lot of truck transportation across the country. Trains are great if you're taking longer than a day. So if you're going all the way from New York to Oregon, you might use a train. If it takes more than a day, trains are usually a little bit more efficient. Air is really fast, so it's expensive but fast. So if you're sending something that's light and easy to transport, so it doesn't weigh a lot, doesn't take a lot of room, then planes might be the way to go, but it's definitely the highest cost. And then shipping is great for long distances across oceans, especially for big items that you're not going to pay to fly over. But it is slow. So it's cheap but slow, and it's really the only efficient way to get things across the water, especially big things. Most companies use a mixture of transportation modes, especially if you're one of those, transnational or global corporations, which most are today. So you're going to have multiple transports, and sometimes you want to locate your factories near what's called a break of bulk point. A break of bulk point is a location where transfer among transportation modes is possible. So along the coast, you have seaports, right? So here we're showing different transportation zones across the world, and they're showing you the heaviest transportation routes and the biggest ports that they leave from. But all of these here are heavy seaports, and so like right here in South Florida, we have the port in West Palm, we have the port in Fort Lauderdale, we have the port in Miami. And all of those ports are usually connected or close to some kind of train track, right? And they have trucks that pull in. So these are all break of bulk points. These are all areas where you can take materials of shipping containers and take them off of trains and put them onto a cargo ship, or you could unload a truck and put them onto a cargo ship. They're also near airports, so depending on what you're shipping, you can transport materials that way, so you can switch from a plane to like a FedEx truck. And so all of those are called break of bulk point, where you're changing from one shipping type to another. And every time you change what you are making in a factory, it results in a different situation factor. So like copper mining, the first step in copper mining is a primary economic factor, right? You have to mine for the copper. Mining is bulk producing, so your copper mines are going to be obviously near their copper mines. But then after you mine the copper, then you have to do what's called concentration. That's when you grind up the copper into fine pieces, and then you mix them with water, and you kind of sort them out from the non-copper materials, and you filter them and you dry them out. So copper concentration areas are going to be located near copper mines, right? Because you're still taking that big ore and you're making it smaller. Most smelting is when you take that concentrated copper and then you heat it up and you remove impurities, and most smelters are going to be located near copper mines, again, because you are further reducing, right? You're taking the big ore, you concentrate it into finer particles, now you're removing impurities, and so you're reducing the mass of that copper every step. And so most smelters are going to be located near copper mines. And then refining is when you're going to create things like copper cathodes. And most refineries, again, are still going to be located by the smelters. And then that copper, now that it's a tiny little cathode, it's going to be sent to factories that take those copper, and you can take it to like foundries where you make the actual copper products. So whether you're putting those copper into like circuit boards, or you're making copper wire and you're putting it into a television, you're going to ship it then, and those will be closer to markets. Another example would be steel. And steel production is a major global industry, and it's one that we've heard them talking about a lot here in the U.S. And where steel has been manufactured in the U.S. has changed over the history of the industrialized U.S. And it's changed because of the importance of the inputs, iron ore and coal, and the proximity of markets. So at first it changed because of where we were finding iron and where we were mining for coal, and then later it changed because the market changed. So if you look at in the beginning, we had these orange sections here are the historical locations of the steel industry. And so in the really beginning, the mid 19th century, so the mid 1800s, a lot of your coal mining was done out in southwest Pennsylvania. It was near some major coal deposits, and we got a lot of our iron ore from Alabama. So we had lots of coal coming all through here, lots of iron coming from there, and we did a lot of our steel industry was located up here. Then towards the late 1800s, it shifted towards like Ohio and the Lake Erie area. And then by the late 1900s, by the early 1900s, it shifted over here to Lake Michigan. And because by then, a lot of our iron ore deposits were really found up in Minnesota and also in Wisconsin. And a lot of our coal deposits were out further west as well. So the inputs that we needed, the raw materials, had shifted further west. And then after the early 1900s, we started to rely on we started to get iron ore that was shipped from other countries. So we located our steel industry out in, the New Jersey area, right? Like the south of New England. And that's because we had a lot of seaports there. And so we were able to get a lot of the iron ore kind of sent back in. And then by the late 20th century, most by the late 1900s, most of the steel industry was kind of closed up in the U.S., and there was a few